So, Dr. Robert Jonas, welcome to the Leaders Way podcast. We're so thankful to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
And what a gift your book on the Trinity has been to me in the last couple of weeks. I've been making my way through. In fact, my daughter discovered the book over the weekend, and she's been reading as well, not by any prompting from me. So I was delighted. So your book, my Dear Far-Nearness, the Holy Trinity as Spiritual Practice, is already blessing my life and my family's life. And what I've noticed about it at the halfway point is that it's poetic and yet practical. It's deeply theological, but it's not overly technical. And so, in honor of your book on the Trinity, I thought I'd ask you three questions simultaneously as a way of beginning to reflect. And so, I'm wondering what led you to write a book about the Trinity? Who is it for? And why did it take 15 years?
Right, right. Okay, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. I have to say that first, and I really look forward to getting to know you better, Brandon, and your work at Yale and the Berkeley Divinity School, and so it's wonderful to be together. And I know we both have an interest in East-West dialogue, Buddhist-Christian dialogue. So this is a fantastic opportunity for me. And the main challenge is limiting my words to 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever. So where did this begin? My grandmother was German Lutheran. I grew up in Wisconsin. Working class families, farmers, house painters. My grandmother, when I was about 2, when I began to learn to speak, um, she would come up to the bedroom in their little 2-story house in Wausau, Wisconsin, and she would teach me to pray. And her prayer to me was, Ich bin klein, mein Herz ist rein, niemand im Wohnen als Jesus allein. I'm small, my heart is pure, and no one lives in my heart but Jesus alone. And that prayer really sustained me through the years. My parents were good people, but also could fall into alcoholism and domestic violence. And there were many traumatic moments in my childhood, and a lot of anger about abandonment. My father left the family, moved to California, just left us 3 kids. So my childhood nest was complicated and traumatic, but Jesus was there. And it was the most amazing blessing to me that I could feel this presence of Jesus. Now, I have to say that that this presence was iconated by this Jesus. And I thought it was kind of for me, a photograph of Jesus of Nazareth, But then I finally learned that it was a painting by Warner Salmon, who was a businessman who had a spiritual experience of Jesus in the 1920s. And this icon of Jesus became, as you know, famous in Protestant and Catholic churches all over the country. American soldiers carried this image to battle in World War II. And so when I felt overwhelmed and when I felt anxious as a kid, I could lash out. I was arrested for breaking and entering when I was 11. The policeman put me in a cell as I waited for my mother, anxiously waited for my mother. And I was so angry, and I didn't know I was angry. I just thought this is normal. He put me in a judge's place where the judge would have hearings, I guess you'd say. And he said, "You wait for your mother here." After he took me out of the cell, put me in this other place. Well, while I was there, I went into the judge's desk and stole a pair of sunglasses. That's how out of control I was. But many things happened, and to make a long story short, we moved. My mother found a good man to marry. The 3 of us, I have 2 siblings. And I went to high school and fell in love with the preacher's daughter, and started learning about Christian experience and liturgy in more depth. And so, and I became you know, a respected person in high school and the head of the Luther League at the Lutheran Church and the captain of the football team, and got a scholarship and went to Luther College. So that's the beginning of the Holy Trinity. But I have to say right away there, it was Jesus that was the key portal to a spiritual life in the midst of trauma. And I didn't think much about the Trinity. The Trinity sort of circulated through the language of the Lutheran Church, but it was Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And it was something to believe in, but it wasn't an actual experience. And as I grew older, I went to Dartmouth College after Luther College, and I discovered Taekwondo karate, and I learned Chan meditation. And this is the 1960s, a long time ago, over 50 years ago. And suddenly I'm wondering, well, what does Jesus have to do with Taoist experience or with Chan? What did did Jesus have an experience of qi, the sacred body energies of the Taoists and Zen folks? And then I discovered Thomas Merton, that he wondered about this too. Is there any connection between Christ and Zen and shunyata, emptiness or whatever? And I mean, all the different words we use to describe the depth of spiritual experience. So that started my Buddhist Christian journey. And I still never thought about the Trinity very much, except that I was very attracted to Thomas Merton talking about things like he had a relationship with Buddhists in the Far East, le point vierge, the virgin point. And I began to understand as I meditated in the 70s that le point vierge is the empty place out of which everything comes. And I started to get interested in the relationship between spirituality and astronomy and physics. And so I was navigating through all that territory when I realized that I had had a traumatic childhood. And by now I was getting a doctorate at Harvard. And so I switched my studies from peace studies to psychodynamic psychotherapy and started to integrate psychodynamic psychology and my personal experience of recovering from trauma and an alcoholic family in integrating those experiences with Jesus's presence, not Werner Salmon's Jesus, but Jesus, who I didn't know and for whom there's no image. So then I met Henry Nouwen at Harvard and ended up being friends with Henry and writing 2 books about Henry. So I'm going to try to collapse all this very as quickly as I can. I mean, I'm 76 years old, so there's a lot has happened, and all of it's important to me, and I can't say it all. But Henry introduced me to the essence of the Jesus experience, which is the belovedness, the I thou belovedness, that I am loved. I am the beloved. And Henry went so far as a Roman Catholic priest to say, you're as beloved as Jesus. He often said, what is said of Jesus is said of you. Wow, that was pretty incredible. So I started trying to integrate the le point vierge, the emptiness, the spatial awareness that is limitless and can see linear time passing through, but not be attached to anything. So I began to see there's a relationship between being the beloved and being empty, in a sense. And then I made the connection between Zen shunyata and Christian kenosis, the self-emptying of Christ. As you know, it's a very exciting territory to be in. And I joined the Society for Buddhist Christian Dialogue in the early 90s. And it was so wonderful to have years and years of conversations with scholars about the relationship between shunya, the Buddhist emptiness, and Christ emptiness. Is it the same? Is it the different? And how are they related? So those are the first and the second persons uh, of the Trinity, which was articulated in the Nicene Creed and the Creed of Chalcedon. Well, the Nicene, I can't go into too much detail, but there was the Nicene Creed and then the Creed of Nicene and the Chalcedon, and there were lots of really important historical discussions about who is God. That began with Genesis, that we are created in the image and likeness of God. But there was this experience for Christians that was a little different than for Jews, even though Jesus was a Jew, a devoted Jew. So if I am created in the image and likeness of God, for Christians, ultimately where it gets is that I'm created in the image and likeness of the Trinity. And who is the Trinity? Okay, so the Trinity, and I did tons. That's why it took 15 years. I did tons of research into Scripture and the creeds about who is God and who am I, and of course they end up being the same question, which is not to say that I am God and nobody else is God. So it's not an ego project. It's that as Christ said, I am in you and you're in me. So that what I experience, who is the I, is a really important question. So when Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, I don't think he meant, and that was not an ego project for him. It was not an ego I. I was completely integrated with the mystery of the Creator. So when he said I, he meant both his small s self and his large s self, which is the creator self, if you want to put it that way. I can't go into Hinduism, it's too much, I know, but I just want to say that Jesus had this realization when you see me, you see the Father. When you see me, you see the Creator. And who is the Creator? There's no image for the Creator. And we know this from the Hindu, the Hindu tradition, but the Jewish tradition. There is no image. In fact, to have an image of God for some is heresy. So Jesus was saying, when you see me, you see the Father, but who is the Father? Abba, but who is Abba? And pretty soon you're in the cloud of unknowing. So the first person is the great mystery of the Creator. The second person is the I love you in a personal relationship that Jesus brings to our lives. That I see you as the beloved, you see me as the beloved. That is a very concrete focusing of the mystery of creation. And then the third person is Holy Ghost. I don't particularly care for that term. It can be misunderstood. Holy Spirit. Hagios Pneuma is the spirit that is moving in the world, creating a community of love that Martin Luther King talked about, the beloved community. There's a movement afoot in the air, in our feet, on the earth, a movement to create a community that treats each other as the beloved, where all the members of the community treat. That's the third person. And so that is a quick summary of how I got here talking to you and writing this book. Yeah.
Thank you. And in the first few pages, you write that the Holy Trinity for many is an outdated dogma. And that's been my experience as I've been reading the book and sharing with friends and family acquaintances that I'm reading this book about the Trinity. I get a kind of eye roll or a faraway glance. Who is the book for? And what's your sense of how many people struggle around the Trinity? What is it that people don't understand?
Yeah. Thank you. That's really good. Well, first of all, I have to say that because when you introduced me, you described the kind of expansive approach I take to the Trinity. There's deep theology, and there's the creedal stuff, and there's psychology, and then there's the spiritual actual experience. Like it's so there is a problem with this book, and that it's a lot, And it's not directed to any particular audience. It's not directed to just to theologians. It's not necessarily even directed to Christians, because I think Hindu folks and Jewish folks and Buddhist folks can find themselves in this book if they're patient. So it's a problem. I don't think it's going to sell a lot in the first year. It's too much, but it's my comprehensive understanding. Most people understand the Trinity in the iconic way. That is, they have an image of three folks who have somehow a relationship with each other, and theologians talk about which one is first and which one's second, which one's more important, and all this, as if the Trinity is outside of us. But what I learned from Raymond de Panikkar, this great theologian, whose one parent was Catholic and one parent was Hindu, is he's hard to read because he's so dense, but he led me into this understanding that the Trinity is within, the Trinity is without. The Trinity is not just within us, it's not just without us. It's an interplay of presence. And so the Holy Trinity is actual, as the subtitle of my book says, it's a spiritual practice. The Holy Trinity is not an object of our awareness. It's a spiritual practice. It's something to be. So I say often in the book, we are called as Christians to be Trinitarian awareness, to live Trinitarian awareness. It's not out there some way. It's not in a heaven somewhere. So this idea that what is inside is outside, this folks these days are calling it non-dual consciousness. And Richard Rohr talks about it a lot, and Cynthia Bourgeault and Ken Wilber. Non-dual consciousness means basically what's inside is outside. We tend to think that navigating this world is all about coming to terms with what's outside of us, but we miss the crucial standing point, which is our deepest identity is in God, and we see from there. So Origen, 2nd century after Christ, reflected deeply on this. He wrote, "He who is known is mingled in a certain way with he who knows. Whatever we see in others is also within us." And we know this from the idea of projection in psychology. Yeah, from Freud and from Jung, both talked about. In fact, Jung, I think it was, who said that our true coming to terms with who we really are requires a withdrawing of all projections onto others. So it means so deeply entering into ourselves that we find others inside of ourselves. And that, for me, releases me from judgment about people. And that practice is the oneness of the Trinity. The Trinity is one, but it's also three. And so you have this navigation of perception that is called the perichoresis, as you know, the dance of love. So the three persons, this is difficult. It would require more conversation about what does person mean, hypostasis and all that. But I want to get back to the main point there. Thomas Aquinas, picking up on Origen and Aristotle both, said, the truth is that knowledge is caused by the knower containing a likeness of the thing known, for the latter must be in the knower somehow. And then that's unquote. Then I add, spiritual knowing seems to require a constant mirroring between us and others, between us and the Creator, between us and Christ. William Blake, who many of us love, the 18th century poet, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to us as it is, infinite. For we have closed ourselves up till we see things only through the narrow chinks of our cavern. So what is the cavern? The cavern is the ego self, where we think we're separate from the world, and capitalism requires this, that we have to have a vocation. Well, we call it vocation, that's a good word, but we have to have a job, and we have to make good in the world. And so we have to do that by separating ourselves from others. That is not the Trinitarian way. We have this capability of finding the world in ourselves and ourselves in the world. And that's essentially what the approach is of my Dear Far-Nearness. I get the name Far-Near from Marguerite Porete in the 14th century. She was so smart and onto this before many of us realized what was happening, non-dual consciousness and all this. And some of us believe, scholars believe, that she may have been the main teacher of Meister Eckhart. So, we know so much about Eckhart, so many of us do, but we don't know much about Marguerite Porete, who taught him, maybe not person to person, but he read her and he loved her. She was so brilliant and so onto the truth, and such a great humble person, that she was burned at the stake by the authorities in 1310. So her name for God is my dear Far-Nearness. You think of that, dear. Dear it connotes belovedness. You're my dear one. Dear, far and near. God is not totally inside me. God is not totally outside me. And so that's what the whole book is about. And I'll just go to the conclusion of the book. I was looking for examples of someone who lives this Trinitarian awareness of the great mystery of the Creator is within us, and the second person is the Christ example of loving others, even in the face of death. And the third is the creating community of love, the beloved community. And I discovered or remembered this movie about Oskar Schindler. And oh, I'm blanking on the director's name.
Oh, was it Steven Spielberg?
Steven Spielberg. Yes, yes. It's such an amazing film, as you know, and the example of how Oscar, in the final days of the war, he has a realization and an awakening, because he has used the Jewish workers for his own benefit for years, hundreds and hundreds of them. And but he gradually begins to love certain Jewish workers, and even to the point where, toward the end of the war, he's ready to give his life for these people that he loves. So they're not, they're not objects anymore. They're not objects of his awareness. They are so essential to his life that he's willing to give his life for them. And when he's standing in the factory at the end, when the end of the war has been announced, there are Nazis with guns up on the ramparts, and they're looking out at 1,000 Jewish workers, and Oskar Schindler is standing above them, and he looks over at the Nazis and he says, "I know that you've been told that now before you leave the factory, you're supposed to kill all the Jews." And he said, "Now's your chance," basically. And but he's wearing a cross, and he has totally rejected his Christian background and his wife, who was Roman Catholic. He's rejected all that holy life that he once had. It wasn't really grounded. He had to go through a lot of trauma to get there. But he says, as he's pondering that moment of somebody's gonna die here. My life is at stake. Their life is at stake. Those Nazis are going to go to, they're going to have their own traumas to deal with. And one of the workers starts to sing the Kaddish, this sacred song of mourning, and looking up at Oskar Schindler. And as they sing the Kaddish, he joins in. As a Christian, he's joining in the Jewish song of mourning and blessing, and he crosses himself. So is he Jewish or is he Christian? What is that identity? Who has he become? And what I do in the final chapters is kind of unpack how he's expressing this Trinitarian awareness of the great mystery of life, of the love, the I thou love that Jesus brought, and of the beloved community that he's creating with these Jewish workers. He doesn't care about the boundary between who's Jewish and who's Christian. He doesn't care even about the boundary between Nazi and not Nazi, because you can feel that he experiences compassion for everyone. Doesn't matter. And that is such a beautiful representation, I think, of living this Trinitarian awareness, not just thinking that the Trinity is out there somewhere who's going to save us. This is work. This is a kind of work, holy work.
This interreligious exchange and encounter, I know, has been a big part of your life. You're mentioning it here in the movie Schindler's List. What was powerful for me is your reference of Zen, and especially of Thich Nhat Hanh, was the wonderful Zen teacher who just passed away a little over a year ago. And I wonder if you can share how Thich Nhat Hanh's practice, teaching, writing, life, and maybe some other Zen Buddhist teachers have helped you as a Christian um, understand this core non-dual insight that's really at the center of Christianity, though it's often shrouded, certainly at the center of Buddhism, Hinduism, and the mystical tradition that's embedded within many different religious paths. So
Yes.
I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. One example, a little story. So, in the early '80s, when I was exploring more seriously, I was at Harvard, and I was working on a dissertation. It was about gender relations. It was about male and female identity, and the interrelationships, and about the self-othering that happens in marriage, for example, and in childbearing. So I've been working on that dissertation, and I met Henry Nouwen, who was at the Harvard Divinity School. And I was really taken with his presencing of Christ in the room when he spoke. His classes were so overloaded; he had to repeat a class and say, "Everybody go home now. I'm done," but so that others could come in. And that was so that relationship uh, started to change me. But at the same time, I met Margaret, who's I'm married to now for 40 years. We've been married. Second marriage. I went through a really painful divorce in the early years at Harvard. And Margaret's mother was a Vipassana Buddhist teacher with Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein and Sarah, what's her name? I
Sharon
don't know.
Salzberg?
Yeah, sure. So thank you. Yeah. So when Margaret and I got together, and as we were preparing for the marriage year, was in 1986, we started doing a lot of Vipassana meditation. So I'm with Henry speaking about I, thou, belovedness, and I'm in the Vipassana tradition, which really doesn't have that I, thou dimension very much. So I would cheat at the Vipassana retreats. I did 2 10-day retreats, for example, and then a lot of smaller ones. There's a meditation hall at the IMS, Insight Meditation Society, and that meditation hall, well, the whole building used to be a monastery, Christian monastery. So all the Christian symbols are gone except for one, which is stained glass window of Jesus in the meditation hall. So I would cheat because we would do walking meditation, and I would occasionally get myself over to that side of the room where Jesus was. And I would do my walking meditation with Jesus back and forth. You know, you're here, you're not here, you're far and you're near. I mean, it was all there at the beginning. And I realized gradually that that's what I was missing, was the devotional dimension, the presencing of belovedness. I just wasn't finding it. Vipassana has changed in America. I have to acknowledge that. But at that time, that dimension was not there. So I was sitting in the meditation hall one day in a 10-day retreat, and I don't know, it was day 4 or 5, and I'm just sitting there in silence with 100 people, and we have 10 hours of silence a day, and I gradually realized that I'm really judging everybody. Like I don't like how that person looks. I don't like what she wears. I don't like how he constantly adjusts himself on the cushion. I started to realize, oh my God, I'm just such a judgmental person. I couldn't stand it. It was as if I was living in the middle of a merry-go-round, and there were 12 horses going around, and each horse was one of my judgments about other people, or each horse was my opinions, my political opinions, my spiritual, religious opinions, my opinions about myself, my opinions, and that's all. This is what the realization. is that all I am? These 12 opinions and judgments, the same ones over and over. Doesn't matter who I'm talking to, where I am. That's who I am. I was disgusted as I'm sitting on the cushion. I'm just like, oh my God, I hate myself, you know? And I'm sitting there, and gradually what happened, the hatred started to like burn in a fire or something. And I started to cry, and I started to cry, and the tears are coming down on my Buddhistic Vipassana cushion. And it was love that was coming, the love that was coming, like, oh my God, that's who I am. I'm not all my opinions and my judgments. I'm love. I mean, I didn't mean an ego love. I mean the I that transcends ego I. And it was just so beautiful. I just wept on the cushion. And then, I don't know, the next sessions and the next sessions come in, and more everyday stuff started to flood in. But I had that experience. So that was, and how would I say that? That was a Christian awakening in a Buddhist retreat center of the immense, limitless love of God coming to me, and really changed me. And it gave me the message that there is no boundary here. This love is everywhere. You can find it in a Buddhist monastery, in a Christian church, in a Sufi dance, anywhere you want to go. It's everywhere because it's eternal and it has no boundaries. And
So you're writing from the depths of Christian contemplative experience, which defies any category, which is a kind of invitation to encounter this mystery that we name as God, as Trinity. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about, from your perspective, what does the Christian contemplative path have to offer Christianity today? Um, and why might it be so important as we create the next chapter of the Christian story?
oh wow, yeah, thank you for that. Wow, what a question! I mean, that's a mind-blowing question. As you know, we all know that Christianity is in trouble. I have a friend. My wife is an Episcopal priest, and her priest or her bishop hired her 10 years ago to work on climate change full time. So our house is full of this flow of the facts about how we humans are destroying the planet. And every day I think about it, I feel some some days really close to despair, that we can't save this thing. The human project is a failure, and so how do we live that? How do we live it? So I fall back into this central place, this Le Point Vierge inside myself, that I can't bear this, to see human beings destroy the planet, and each other. I can't bear it. And I've experienced trauma and despair, and I don't like it. I don't prefer it. So I prefer to be in this place of love that is ultimately true. It's ultimate truth. And so that's how I try to live as I do environmental work. I've been board chair of a Kestrel Land Trust, and I work with now two other land trusts, working on some big projects here in Western Massachusetts to save as much forest, as much landscape, as much water and clear air as we can. So I'm working on it, but I'm also feeling like it. We don't. There's no guarantee this is going to work. So I throw myself on what's ultimately true, and just trust that God will help, and God is not going to come from outside to help. I don't believe that anymore. That God has to come from inside to help, and one place of insight that can help is my Dear Far-Nearness, which is the respect and the experience of the great mystery, that we are mystery. We can't understand God's mystery unless we understand that we're a mystery. We don't know who we are. And there's a limitless openness about that we can learn. And then the second person, that we can fall in love with people, and I mean in appropriate ways, because I also have dealt with a lot, worked with a lot of people who've been traumatized by the sexual indiscretions that have happened in Buddhism and Christianity and Judaism. It doesn't matter across the traditions. So this is a love that is not self-centered and is not looking for just pleasure, but it's a love that looks for healing for everyone. And so I have hope in this Trinitarian awareness, even as I experience despair. It's like they're both here. My dear far near. This is my dear despair, far and near.
So you touched on hope. I wonder if you can leave us with what you're most hopeful about. You've named the apocalyptic concern that's in your heart that we all face daily,
Yeah.
and what buoys your spirit and brings you hope as you hold
Mm.
that heaviness.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, one hope is what gets ignited in my friendship with you. To know someone like you who has also navigated this across the boundaries of the great traditions. So anytime I meet someone like you, I feel hopeful that we can do this, that these boundaries that we've created of self and other need to dissolve. Another way that I learned that is in the leadership of or the hosting of the Empty Bell communities. Right now, I have three Empty Bell communities: the Christians on Sunday morning and Interfaith on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. People meet here in this Empty Bell space, which is kind of like it's I modeled it after a Zen monastery with the wood and the soji doors and so things like that, where we gather for an hour and a half at a session, and we have 20 minutes of silence, and then we share what's coming. How are we working with this despair and this lack of hope and the hope, and that gives me hope to be with others who can tell the truth. Most people have had some therapeutic experience, which I'm finding really necessary. I've had a lot of therapeutic experience. I've been a therapist and I've also been in therapy. In fact, I'm in therapy right now, not with you, but also also with an actual psychiatrist who's Jewish, who can talk to me about Ein Sof and other the names of God in my actual experience. So yeah, these things give me hope. Meeting others, being with others, we need each other to get through this.
Dr. Robert Jonas, thank you for your ministry, your work, your writing. We're so thankful for this book, and I look forward to concluding my journey with the book in the days ahead. So, thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you. Well, one thing you can do for me, and that is Margaret was telling me about this because Margaret, my wife, is a writer too. She said, make sure you ask friends to write a good review on Amazon. So there it is.
Will do. I'll head to Amazon, as I'm sure many others will and already have right after this conversation. Thank you. Be at peace.
Thank you, and I wish you well in your work there at Yale. Thank you. Blessings.